good morning, and stop what you're doing right now, because what I'm about to share with you could be the single most important thing you watch this entire year. Not for your heart, not for your joints, for your eyes, and specifically for something that is silently stealing the vision of millions of people over 60 right now. Something that most eye doctors are not talking about during your annual checkup. Something that has almost nothing to do with your glasses prescription and everything to do with what's happening in your blood every single day. I'm Dr. Daniel Hayes, and I've spent over 2 decades working with patients in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who come to me frustrated, scared, and confused about why their vision is getting worse despite doing everything their ophthalmologist told them: new glasses, eye drops, supplements, and still things are blurry. Colors are faded. Night driving feels dangerous. Reading the grandchildren's birthday cards is a squinting, exhausting exercise. Here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. Your eyes are not broken. The problem is almost certainly coming from somewhere else entirely. And a landmark study, published by researchers at the University of California, San Francisco, found that adults over the age of 60 with chronically elevated blood glucose, even slightly elevated, not diabetic levels, just elevated, experienced a 47% accelerated rate of retinal microvascular damage compared to those with stable blood sugar. 47%. And the terrifying part? Most of those patients had no idea their blood sugar was a problem. They weren't diabetic. They just weren't optimal. Today, I'm going to walk you through 6 hidden blood sugar mechanisms that are destroying your vision after 60, ranked from important to absolutely critical. And I'm going to tell you right now, number 1 on this list is something that almost no one is talking about. Something so counterintuitive that when I explain it to patients, they almost always say, "Why did no one ever tell me this?" So stay with me all the way through, because the most important information is coming at the end. Before we dive in, I want to ask you something personally. Leave a comment below and tell me, how old are you? And have you noticed any changes in your vision in the last 2 to 3 years? Maybe things are a little hazier. Maybe you're more sensitive to light. Maybe you've just accepted it as normal aging. I read every single comment on this channel, and your answer is going to help me create more content that actually serves you. Now let's get into it. Number 6, the sugar coating on your eye's blood vessels and why it's worse after 60 than your doctor thinks. Here is something that will change the way you think about sugar forever. When glucose, that's just blood sugar, the fuel your body runs on, when glucose levels stay elevated for extended periods of time, it begins to physically attach itself to proteins and fats throughout your body in a process called glycation. Think of glycation like rust forming on metal pipes. The pipes are still there. They still look okay from the outside, but on the inside, they're slowly becoming brittle, clogged, and dysfunctional. Now here's why this is catastrophically relevant to your vision. The retina, the thin layer of tissue at the back of your eye that actually processes everything you see. The retina has one of the highest concentrations of tiny blood vessels, called capillaries, anywhere in the entire human body. And after 60, those capillary walls are already naturally thinner and more fragile than they were at 40. Researchers at Johns Hopkins Wilmer Eye Institute found that glycation-related damage to retinal capillaries can begin accumulating in blood glucose levels as low as 110 milligrams per deciliter, a number that millions of Americans over 60 hit regularly after meals without ever knowing it. The sugar is literally coating the insides of the vessels that feed your most precious sensory organ. And here's the practical action you can take starting today. After any meal that contains carbohydrates, bread, rice, fruit, pasta, take a 10 to 15-minute walk. Not a jog, not a workout, a gentle walk. A study from George Washington University showed this reduced post-meal glucose spikes by up to 22%. Pair this with a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar in water before your largest meal of the day, which has been shown in research from Arizona State University to reduce glucose spikes by nearly 34% by slowing the rate at which sugar enters your bloodstream. The inflammation wildfire inside your aging eye and how blood sugar is pouring gasoline on it. Margaret, 71 years old, from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, came to see me after her optometrist told her she was developing early macular degeneration and there wasn't much that could be done. She was devastated. She loved to paint watercolors, and the thought of losing her central vision felt like losing part of her identity. When we ran her full metabolic panel, her fasting blood glucose was 104. Not diabetic, not even pre-diabetic by most standard definitions, but her inflammatory markers, specifically a protein called C-reactive protein, which is one of the best indicators of systemic inflammation in the body, were through the roof. Here's the connection most people miss. Elevated blood sugar doesn't just damage blood vessels directly. It triggers a massive inflammatory response throughout the body, and the eye is exquisitely sensitive to inflammation. The macula, that's the central part of your retina responsible for your sharp, detailed vision. The part you use to read faces and words and fine details is particularly vulnerable. Research from the National Eye Institute demonstrated that chronic low-grade inflammation, the kind driven by blood sugar dysregulation, accelerates macular degeneration progression by up to 58% in adults over 65. After 70, your body's ability to resolve inflammation on its own drops by roughly 40% compared to your younger years, meaning once it starts, it takes far longer to calm down. For Margaret, we introduced a targeted dietary protocol emphasizing omega-3 fatty acids from cold water fish. Turmeric with black pepper. The black pepper, containing piperine, increases turmeric absorption by up to 2,000%, and strict control of post-meal glucose spikes. 18 months later, her follow-up imaging showed the progression had halted. She sent me a painting she made of the Louisiana Bayou. I still have it in my office. Number 4. The oxygen starvation your retina is experiencing right now and the blood sugar connection nobody explains. Let me give you an analogy that will make this crystal clear. Imagine your retinal cells are workers in a factory, and oxygen is their electricity. Without electricity, the machines stop. Without adequate oxygen, your retinal cells begin to malfunction and eventually die. Now, how does blood sugar connect to oxygen delivery? Here's where it gets fascinating and frightening at the same time. When blood glucose stays chronically elevated, it triggers a response in the blood itself. Red blood cells, the cells responsible for carrying oxygen throughout your body, become less flexible. They stiffen. And those tiny capillaries in your retina? Some of them are so narrow that red blood cells have to literally squeeze through them single file, bending and flexing to make the journey. When blood sugar makes those red blood cells rigid, they can't squeeze through anymore. But delivery trucks can't make the delivery. The retinal cells begin starving for oxygen. Scientists at the University of Oxford found that this phenomenon, called erythrocyte deformability reduction, is measurably worse in adults over 60 with blood sugar levels above 100 and dramatically worse above 115. The solution begins with hydration, and I cannot stress this enough. Mild dehydration, something almost every senior over 65 experiences chronically without realizing it, thickens the blood and makes this problem significantly worse. 8 to 10 glasses of water daily is not optional for eye health after 60. Additionally, nitric oxide, a natural compound your body produces, is one of the most powerful natural vasodilators, meaning it widens blood vessels and improves blood flow. Beetroot, specifically beetroot juice or powder, consumed 90 minutes before your most sedentary period of the day, has been shown in research from the University of Exeter to increase nitric oxide levels by up to 21%, meaningfully improving microvascular circulation. This is the synergy tip. Pair beetroot with vitamin C, which helps stabilize nitric oxide and extends its beneficial effects in the bloodstream. Now, before we get into the top 3, and these are where it gets really serious, I want to pause for just a second. If this information is opening your eyes, no pun intended, to what might be happening inside your body right now, please take a moment to hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more seniors who are sitting at home right now, wondering why their vision is declining and being told nothing can be done. And as you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I put out medically grounded content every week specifically for people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I never want you to miss something that could change your health trajectory. Now, let's get into the top 3, because this is where the real revelations are. Number 3, the lens clouding sugar trap. How blood sugar is accelerating your cataracts decades faster than aging alone. Robert, 68 years old, retired firefighter from Columbus, Ohio, told me he figured cataracts were just part of getting old. His father had them, his uncle had them, he assumed he was simply next in line. But when we looked at his blood sugar patterns over 90 days using continuous monitoring data, what we found was remarkable. Every single afternoon around 2 to 3 p.m., his blood sugar was spiking to over 140 milligrams per deciliter after his lunch habit of a sandwich, chips, and a glass of orange juice. He thought it was a healthy lunch. His lens cells were paying the price. Here's the science. The lens of your eye, that clear, flexible structure that focuses light onto your retina, doesn't have its own blood supply. It gets its glucose from the fluid surrounding it, called the aqueous humor. And inside the lens, there's an enzyme pathway called the polyol pathway. When blood glucose is too high, the lens converts excess glucose into a substance called sorbitol, which is a sugar alcohol. Unlike glucose, sorbitol cannot leave the lens easily. It accumulates, it draws in water, it disrupts the perfectly organized protein fibers called crystallins that give the lens its clarity. Over time, this is what turns a crystal clear lens into the foggy yellowed opacity we call a cataract. Researchers at Harvard Medical School found that adults with chronically elevated post-meal glucose spikes experienced cataract formation up to 15 years earlier than their blood sugar-stable peers. That's not a minor difference. That's a dramatically different quality of life for over a decade. The practical intervention here is profound and surprisingly simple. Reducing the glycemic load of your lunch, specifically because afternoon is when most people's insulin sensitivity is at its daily low, can have an outsized impact. Replacing refined carbohydrates at lunch with protein and fiber-rich alternatives, adding a handful of almonds or walnuts as a buffer food before eating, and spending even 8 minutes standing or walking after eating can collectively reduce that critical afternoon glucose spike by up to 30%. The synergy tip here is magnesium, specifically magnesium glycinate, taken with dinner. Magnesium is a cofactor in over 300 enzymatic reactions involved in glucose metabolism, and research from the University of Vermont showed that adults with higher magnesium intake had significantly lower rates of sorbitol accumulation in lens tissue. Aim for 300 to 400 milligrams daily, and always check with your physician first if you're on any medications. Number 2, the nerve-crushing blood sugar storm and why your optic nerve is more vulnerable after 70 than science previously understood. This one I want you to pay very close attention to, because this mechanism is the least discussed and potentially the most devastating. Your optic nerve is not just a cable that transmits images. It is a living, complex structure made of over 1 million individual nerve fibers, and it is responsible for carrying every piece of visual information your eyes capture to your brain. When that nerve is damaged, vision loss can be permanent. And here is the blood sugar connection that is only now beginning to be understood. Chronically elevated blood glucose creates a state of oxidative stress. Think of this like excessive rust forming at the cellular level throughout your body. The mitochondria, those are the tiny energy factories inside each of your cells. The mitochondria in optic nerve cells are particularly sensitive to oxidative stress. After 65, mitochondrial efficiency in nerve tissue already declines by roughly 35% compared to young adulthood. Add chronic glucose elevation on top of that declining baseline, And researchers at the Mayo Clinic found that optic nerve conduction velocity, the speed at which visual signals travel, slows by up to 26% in adults over 70 with blood sugar dysregulation. This is happening silently, with no pain, no obvious symptoms, until one day you notice your peripheral vision has quietly narrowed, or that colors are duller than they used to be, or that recovering from bright light to darkness takes noticeably longer. The intervention strategy for this specific mechanism involves two powerful nutrients working in tandem. First, alpha-lipoic acid, which is one of the very few antioxidants that can cross the blood-brain barrier and directly protect nerve tissue. Studies published in the journal Diabetes Care found that 600 milligrams of alpha-lipoic acid daily significantly reduced oxidative stress markers in neural tissue. Second, acetyl L-carnitine, which supports mitochondrial energy production specifically in nerve cells. Research from the University of Catania in Italy showed meaningful protection of optic nerve function in aging adults, supplementing with 2 grams daily. The synergy here is powerful. These two compounds together appear to create a compounding effect on mitochondrial protection that neither achieves as effectively alone. As always, full references are linked in the description below, and please discuss any supplementation with your healthcare provider. The blood sugar mechanism destroying your vision that your eye doctor has almost certainly never mentioned, and it begins in your gut. I promised you this would be something you've never heard before, and I want to start by telling you about Eleanor, 77 years old, from Portland, Oregon, who had been managing slowly worsening vision for 6 years. She had seen 4 different specialists. She had tried every vitamin supplement marketed for eye health. She ate what she believed was a healthy diet, lots of whole grains, fruit, yogurt, and low-fat everything, and yet her vision continued to decline. Her blood sugar remained stubbornly elevated in the pre-diabetic range, despite her efforts, and her eye doctor simply continued to document the progressive damage at each annual visit. When Eleanor came to me, I asked her something none of her other doctors had asked. I asked about her gut. And what she described was a decade of antibiotic use for various infections, chronic bloating, and a diet that, while well-intentioned, was systematically destroying the diversity of her intestinal microbiome. Here is the mechanism that is going to change everything you think you know about blood sugar and vision. Inside your gut lives a vast, extraordinarily complex community of bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms, your microbiome. And this community plays a direct, measurable role in regulating your blood glucose levels. Research published in the journal Nature by scientists at the Weizmann Institute of Science found that 2 individuals eating identical foods can have blood glucose responses that differ by up to 300% based solely on the composition of their gut microbiome. 300%, the same meal, completely different blood sugar impact, depending entirely on what lives in your gut. Now here's how this connects to your vision. After 60, the diversity of the gut microbiome naturally declines, a phenomenon called dysbiosis of aging. By 75, research from King's College London estimates that most adults have lost between 30 and 40% of their microbial diversity compared to their younger years. This decline impairs the gut's ability to produce short-chain fatty acids, compounds like butyrate, propionate, and acetate, which are critical for maintaining the intestinal barrier. When that barrier breaks down, a condition called intestinal permeability develops. You may have heard it called leaky gut. Inflammatory compounds from inside the gut begin entering the bloodstream. These compounds directly trigger systemic inflammation, directly impair insulin signaling, and directly elevate blood glucose levels, even in people who believe they're eating carefully. And as we've now established, chronically elevated blood glucose destroys the retinal capillaries, accelerates cataract formation, inflames the macula, stiffens red blood cells, and erodes optic nerve function. The gut is the hidden upstream source, feeding all of these downstream disasters. And this is why Eleanor, despite her best efforts, could not stabilize her blood sugar because the root was not in her diet choices alone. It was in the microbial community governing how her body processed everything she ate. So what do? The intervention here is multi-layered, and it works remarkably well in people over 60 when applied consistently. First, you must introduce genuine microbial diversity through fermented foods, not the sugar-laden yogurts marketed as healthy, but authentic fermented options like plain whole milk kefir, kimchi, raw sauerkraut, and miso. Research from Stanford University found that adults who consumed 6 servings of fermented foods daily for 10 weeks showed measurable increases in microbiome diversity and significant reductions in inflammatory markers. 6 servings sounds like a lot. It isn't. A quarter cup of sauerkraut on your eggs, a half cup of kefir in the morning, a tablespoon of miso stirred into warm broth at lunch. It adds up quickly. Second, you must feed the beneficial bacteria you're rebuilding with prebiotic fiber. This is the food that your gut bacteria eat, distinct from the fiber that simply passes through. The most powerful prebiotic foods for seniors include slightly green bananas, cooked and cooled potatoes, and rice. The cooling process creates something called resistant starch, chicory root, Jerusalem artichokes, and garlic. Third, and this is the synergy tip that brings everything together. Pairing a high-quality spore-based probiotic supplement with your evening fermented food intake appears to dramatically enhance microbial colonization rates. Spore-based probiotics bacillus strains specifically survive the acidic environment of the stomach at far higher rates than conventional probiotics, meaning more actually arrive where they need to go. Research published in World Journal of Gastrointestinal Pathophysiology found that spore-based probiotic supplementation reduced post-meal glucose spikes by an average of 37% in adults with blood sugar dysregulation. For Eleanor, within 4 months of this gut-first protocol, combined with the post-meal walking, the targeted nutrients, and the dietary adjustments, her fasting blood glucose dropped from 112 to 94. Her inflammatory markers normalized for the first time in years. And at her 6-month eye exam, her ophthalmologist noted, for the first time in 6 years, no new documented progression. Eleanor cried in my office when she told me. She said she had stopped letting herself hope. She said she had started to accept that decline was simply what the rest of her life would look like. I want you to hear this clearly. She was wrong. And if you are sitting there right now having accepted the same story about your own vision, about your own health, I want you to know that you may be wrong too. Here's what I need you to take away from everything we covered today. Your vision is not simply aging. Your eyes are reporting on what is happening in your blood vessels, in your nerve tissue, and in your gut. And every single one of those systems is profoundly influenced by how your blood sugar behaves across the full 24 hours of every day. The glycation coating your capillaries, the inflammation consuming your macula, the oxygen starvation of your retinal cells, the sorbitol crystallizing inside your lens, the oxidative storm eroding your optic nerve. And at the root of all of it, the hidden disruption in your gut microbiome that is making your blood sugar response to every meal worse than it needs to be. These are not inevitable. They are not simply the price of getting older. They are biological processes that respond to the right interventions, and it is not too late. Not at 65, not at 72, not at 80. The science is clear. The aging body retains remarkable adaptive capacity when given the right inputs. Your independence, your ability to drive to your grandchildren's school plays, to read the books that have always brought you comfort, to see the faces of the people you love in vivid, clear detail. These things are worth fighting for. And you now have the information to begin fighting intelligently. All scientific references mentioned in today's video are linked in the description below. I encourage you to bring this information to your physician and have a real conversation about your metabolic health as it relates to your eye health. These two conversations should not be happening in separate offices with no connection between them. Now, if this video helped you, please share it with someone over 60 in your life who is struggling with their vision and has been told there's nothing to be done, because there may be far more that can be done than anyone has told them. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because we go this deep every single week. And leave me a comment right now. I want to know, after watching this, which of these 6 mechanisms surprised you the most? And are you going to start with the gut protocol or the post-meal walk? Tell me below. I'll be reading every single one.